Mortimer Litchfield, formerly an accountant, and currently a surprisingly considerate member of the shambling Undead, awoke one drizzly dusk to discover a grave social emergency. He had been invited to the annual Grand Necro Gala, a soiree where leches, ghouls, mummies, vampires, and well-connected zombies gathered to nibble delicately on artisanal spleens and discuss the afterlife's latest trends. Mortimer's eye sockets hummed with excitement and a touch of terror. He'd attended the gala once, many moons and limbs ago, and had created an unforgettable scene by gnawing directly on the centerpiece, mistaking it for the appetizer. Countess Hemoglobin still whispered about the zombie who chewed through the candelabra. This year, Mortimer intended to redeem himself. He practiced saying please to devour, I mean meet you, in the mirror, but his right cheek kept sliding off, which didn't bolster his confidence. There was only one solution: Etiquette school. He flipped through the local Undead Gazette until he found an ad wedged between daytime coffin rentals and haunted timeshares in Transylvania. It read, Polish your posthumous panache! Miss Petunia Putrefax's School of Finishing and Refinishing, specializing in table manners for the marginally decomposed. Mortimer clipped the ad, accidentally slicing through 2 of his fingers in the process. He carried the digits in his coat pocket. He'd need them later, and shuffled to the tuition office that very evening. Miss Petunia Putrefax, a poised specter with faint lavender glow and pearl earrings that floated half an inch from her translucent earlobes, greeted him at the mahogany doors. Her voice tinkled like an old music box with a cracked gear. Welcome, dear sir. May I inquire which limb you write with? She asked, extending a registry quill. My left, Mortimer replied, then remembering himself added, or whichever is currently attached. The quill hovered, scribbling his name onto a parchment that smelled faintly of old libraries and embalming fluid. Splendid. Classes commence at midnight. Tuition may be paid in brains, bat wings, or all major credit cards. No checks. Zombies keep eating them. Mortimer, who'd saved a tidy pile of coins under his headstone, opted for contactless payment. His fingers occasionally popped off, triggering disputed charges. He bowed, dipped like a wilting sunflower, and shuffled down a corridor lined with portraits of impeccably dressed skeletal alumni. One inscription read, Lady Ossa Divina, voted most likely to clack politely. His first session convened in the grand dining crypt, where stone chandeliers dripped melted grave wax over a banquet table set with dusty bone china, goblet-sized skull halves, and napkins monogrammed with a looping macabre P. A half-mummified usher handed out syllabi. Unit 1, Introduction to Silverware, more than just stabbing. Unit 2, Conversation, phrases beyond brines. Unit 3, Keeping your bits attached while masticating. Mortimer scanned the room. Students ranged from a bashful swamp ghoul trying not to ooze on the upholstery to a headless horseman's body holding its detached cranium under one arm like a purse. Mortimer found an empty chair between Sir Reginald Wormwood, an elderly lich with glowing rune tattoos, and Clarabelle Clot, a vampire who claimed she was trying solids again, per her nutritionist. Miss Petunia glided to the front, clasping incorporeal hands. Lesson the first. Posture. She flicked a spectral pointer. Even the undead mustn't slump like collapsed sarcophagi. Mortimer straightened so abruptly his vertebrae sounded like a xylophone being played by an enthusiastic toddler. Clarabelle applauded. Sir Reginald's jaw fell off in admiration, literally. He attached it with a rune that zapped like a bug zapper. Lesson the second. Miss Petunia continued, the utensils. Observe. Silverware floated before each pupil. Salad fork, dinner fork, bone saw, for the tougher entrees, soup spoon, and most perplexing, a tiny spork labeled for ethically sourced cerebellum parfait. Miss Petunia demonstrated a graceful grip, though her fingers phased through the handle a bit. Mortimer examined his own cutlery. In life, he'd handled calculators, not cutlery. In Undeath, he usually went straight for limb to mouth. He practiced politely spearing an imaginary lettuce leaf. The fork prongs punctured the air. Then, drawn by some malevolent gravitational force, circled around and impaled his collarbone. Mortimer suppressed a groan and wrenched the fork free, thinking no one had noticed. Of course, everyone noticed. Gallantry required ignoring it. Accidents happen, Miss Petunia said with a sympathetic shimmer. When they do, you say, "Pardon my dismemberment," and move on. Mortimer repeated it softly. "Pardon my dismemberment." Marvelous. I felt the sincerity. After posture and utensils came small talk. Miss Petunia distributed conversation flashcards, such as weather, fog density, lightning frequency, recent deaths in the family, celebratory condolences, and stock market, current price of coffin futures. Mortimer partnered with the Headless Horseman's body, which communicated using charades while its head heckled from the floor. "Prum!" the body gestured, tapping the card about fog density and flapping arms like wings. Mortimer interpreted, "Ah, yes, unusually thick fog this season. One could practically spread it on toast." The head offered an appreciative muffled cheer, its mouth full of stuffing because it kept biting its own tongue. Mortimer felt a swell of confidence. Maybe he was born to be politely undead. Still, the final unit, keeping your bits attached, loomed ominously. It required dinner simulation complete with roasted calf, actual calf, served by skeletal waiters. Clarabelle, still uncertain about solids, politely requested hers extra hemoglobin, please. The waiter, a ribcage on stilts, clicked in agreement. The moment Miss Petunia rang the dinner bell, chaos threatened. Mortimer, concentrating on elbow off the table, tried slicing his roast with short, gentle strokes. On stroke 1, his wrist detached and catapulted the knife into the dungeon wall. Everyone politely pretended to study their mashed maggot souffle, while Mortimer, red-faced if he'd had sufficient blood, reattached the wrist with a handy twist tie. "Remember," Miss Petunia called, "no projectile extremities before dessert." Sir Reginald whispered, "Rookie mistake. Happened to me in my century." Post-class evaluation came 2 nights later. Students entered the Judgment Mausoleum, where Miss Petunia, Countess Hemoglobin, gala host, an unofficial queen of undead refinement, and an animate gargoyle named Chad served as panel. Mortimer's skull felt like it might perspire, but lacking glands produced a thin mist instead. Each pupil demonstrated skills. Clarabelle gracefully sipped beet soup without gagging on the solids. The Headless Horseman's body poured tea for its own head, achieving symmetrical precision. Mortimer's turn arrived. He glided to the chair, sat straight, and adjusted his tie. Actually, he couldn't find his tie. Then he realized it had slid off and was slooshing across the floor like a sluggish eel. He retrieved it, tied a shaky Windsor knot, and smiled with all remaining teeth. A decanter of chilled cerebellum parfait was placed before him. He selected the teeny spork, inhaled the waft of time, and scooped with perfect wrist angle. No spattering. Panel murmured approval. Next, salad. He located the salad fork, outer left, not the bone saw, executed a modest bite, and refrained from exclaiming, "Tastes like potting soil," which it did. Finally, roasted heart a la tombstone. Mortimer sliced elegantly and lifted a morsel, but as he chewed, one molar dislodged, pinged off a goblet, and splashed into Countess Hemoglobin's lap. Silence stretched, taut as mummy wrappings. Pardon my dismemberment, Mortimer said with calm dignity, offering a linen napkin and a sincere bow. Countess Hemoglobin plucked the tooth with 2 fingertips, inspected it as though evaluating a diamond, and returned it. Accepted, she declared, impressed. Miss Petunia beamed. Chad the gargoyle thumped his stony tail. Mortimer had passed. He received a certificate embossed with silver filigree. Certified civil cadaver. He floated home. Okay. Shambled quickly, but felt like floating. Gala day, or more accurately, gala night, arrived with thunderous percussion and lightning that cracked like party streamers. Mortimer dressed in a freshly remortified tuxedo. Midnight black, single-breasted coffin satin, with pocket squares scented faintly of grave roses. He dabbed formaldehyde cologne behind his non-existent ears and practiced small talk regarding fog indexes one last time. As he approached the gala venue, the ornate ossuary ballroom, he joined a queue of distinguished undead, a jolly werewolf couple discussing toenail waxing, a seductive banshee who complimented Mortimer's posture, and a skeleton in a top hat playing xylophone on his ribs to pass the time. Bouncers, hulking Frankensteins with clipboards, checked invites. Mortimer produced his parchment. One bouncer sniffed it for authenticity, nodding when the aroma of dried worms wafted forth. Inside, candelabras of melted thigh bones illuminated a sweeping marble floor. A quartet of ghosts played waltzes on invisible violins. Chandeliers spun slowly, dripping ectoplasm and iridescent pearls that evaporated before hitting the ground. Buffet tables groaned under platters of pickled pancreas, gluten-free femur chips, and vegan options labeled spirited kale. Mortimer's nostrils fluttered with hunger and mild worry. This was his moment. He spotted familiar faces. Clarabelle Clot, now confidently munching a crostini, waved, her fangs glinting like ivory parentheses. Sir Reginald Wormwood chatted with a pharaoh wrapped in Versace linen. The headless horseman's body was breakdancing. Its head cheered from a punch bowl. Mortimer straightened his spine and promptly reinserted the vertebra that sprang out and strode to the buffet. He selected a chilled plate with the delicacy of a mortician. Salad first. Wilted grave greens drizzled in balsamic despair. He remembered Miss Petunia's advice. Fork, chew. Compliment, chef. He did so, praising the subtle rot. Next, he considered the stew. Hearty arterial ragout, but worried about splatter optics. Instead, he spooned small portions of organic tapenade onto toasted spleen crisps. The gala's highlight was the receiving line for Countess Hemoglobin. Previously mortified attendees remembered Mortimer's candelabra gnawing and whispered bets about repeat disasters. Mortimer inhaled, gently to avoid lung collapse, and stepped into queue. Ahead stood Lord Blightstone, a pompous ghoul with tentacle mustache. Mortimer overheard him brag about devouring 3 waiters at last year's after-party. Not exactly the vibe Mortimer hoped to emulate. Approaching the dais, Mortimer evaluated his plan. Greeting, handshake, small talk about lightning frequency, compliment on decor, then discreet exit. Simple. 5 steps. Step 1, greeting. Countess Hemoglobin, good evening, an honor. I remember you, she purred, eyes crimson whirlpools. The candelabra connoisseur. Mortimer smiled graciously. Indeed, and I have spent the intervening months acquiring rather more conventional tastes. Step 2, handshake. Mortimer extended just the right amount of decayed hand. She squeezed lightly. No finger loss. Victory. Step 3, small talk. A startlingly vigorous lightning display tonight. Did you commission the storm yourself? She fluttered her lace fan. A modest request to the weather wraiths. Exquisite choice, he said, meaning it. Step 4, compliment decor. Your bone chandeliers positively glow with sophistication. The Countess's grin widened. How refreshing to meet a zombie with vocabulary beyond brains! Step 5. Exit. Mortimer bowed, executed an elegant quarter turn, then heard a sickening slurp. His left foot had embedded in spilled marrow pudding, suctioned like a boot in tar. As he tugged, the shoe tore away with a moist pop, revealing not a sock, but an embarrassingly bare metatarsal structure. The nearest spectators gasped. Lord Blightstone snickered. Mortimer steadied himself, remembered Miss Petunia's mantra, and announced, "Pardon my dismemberment." Then, rather than scramble clumsily, he pulled off the other shoe for symmetry, placing both on the serving tray of a passing skeleton waiter. He turned back to the Countess, unflappable. She considered him, then laughed, a melodious predatory sound. "How elegantly you embraced catastrophe! Delightful!" The tension dissolved. Whispers turned admiring. The band struck a peppier tune, and undead couples drifted to the dance floor. Clarabelle zipped over. "Mortimer, you were fantastic! Dance!" He hesitated. His knees creaked like antique doors, yet etiquette demanded he at least attempt. "Gladly!" Holding her respectful distance. Vampires can't resist pulses, and Mortimer had none. They waltzed. Mortimer counted. 1, 2, 3. Spin. Reattach elbow. 1, 2, 3. Clarabelle chatted about the new synthetic plasma cocktail scene. Mortimer responded with tidbits from his conversation cards. They maneuvered past a conga line of ghouls and an entire polka of poltergeists. Mid-twirl, a sudden shout erupted. Lord Blightstone, apparently overeager at the buffet, had stabbed a bone saw through the table in attempt to spear a squirming kidney souffle, toppling servingware like dominoes. Spleen crisp soared. The bone china cracked. A torrent of blood-orange sorbet sluiced toward the dance floor. Guests shrieked. Ghosts fizzed. Werewolves howled. Disaster threatened the gala's sterling reputation. Mortimer's accountant brain, still serviceable, calculated. Slope of marble. Viscosity of sorbet. Trajectory towards the dais. It would splash Countess Hemoglobin's gown in 15 seconds. He acted. "Clarabelle, pardon me." He detached his cummerbund, a broad satin strip, and with a flick reminiscent of matadors and disgruntled dads, converted it into an impromptu dam. Positioning himself between tidal sorbet and dazed aristocrats, he wedged the cloth under a tilted platter, redirecting the flow into a conveniently empty cauldron, bobbing with dry ice. Clarabelle flashed fangs in approval, conjuring a gust that helped push the sorbet along. The hiss of dessert hitting dry ice echoed, steamy and dramatic. Applause erupted. Even the headless horseman's head whistled from the punch bowl. Countess Hemoglobin descended, gown unblemished, and surveyed the scene. "Crisis averted," she proclaimed. "All thanks to Mr. Litchfield." Cameras, operated by paparazzi skeletons whose flashbulbs produced ghostly phosphorescence, clicked. Mortimer's jaw sagged a full half-inch in surprised gratitude. He rehitched it, bowed, and found himself ushered back to the dais. "Mortimer," the Countess said, voice laced with ceremonial pomp, "for exemplary manners, composure under pressure, and selfless service to this community, I hereby appoint you Master of Ceremonies for next year's gala." The ballroom roared. Sir Reginald tossed his hat in the air, which then disintegrated, but he clapped anyway. Miss Petunia Putrefax materialized, tearful sparkles in her eyes. "I knew you had potential, darling cadaver." Lord Blightstone, face smeared with sorbet, muttered, "Humph." But even he joined the clapping when the Frankenbouncers glared. Mortimer accepted a ruby-encrusted lapel pin shaped like crossed forks, Photographers snapped away while he smiled modestly and kept every tooth diligently in place. He couldn't remember feeling so alive. Well, that was physically impossible, but he felt a sense of purpose more potent than any warm pulse. Later, as the festivities mellowed into sophisticated munching and subdued howling, Mortimer stood on the balcony overlooking the moonlit cemetery gardens. Clarabelle joined him, swirling a goblet of crimson punch. "You handled tonight flawlessly," she said. "What's your secret?" "Honestly." Mortimer tapped his pocket, where Miss Petunia's laminated flashcard peeked out. "Practice and excellent teachers!" A distant thunder roll punctuated the sentiment. Fireflies lit graves like votive candles. Somewhere below, the headless horseman's body attempted karaoke, while its head provided critical commentary. Clarabelle laughed, the sound less predatory than before. Mortimer raised his glass of vegan embalming fluid. "To Etiquette," he toasted, bridging the gap between the living, the dead, and everything in between. They clinked glasses gently, no splintering. Mortimer gazed across the gala, proud that he'd not only learned which fork went where, but that dignity, even in death, could be a vibrant, life-saving art. And though he still occasionally misplaced an ear or nibbled a napkin, he knew one irrefutable truth. Good manners never die. They simply become delightfully undead.